it is a pleasure to be at the Economic Club. I'm an economics major from the University of Florida, Food and Resource Economics, which is an interesting choice of study. Unlike the business economics degree, ours is really a focus on the things that don't follow the usual rules of supply and demand, like the economics of air and the economics of water and things where you don't have the normal forces weighing on you, and it makes for a fascinating course of study that I think has served me well, particularly as I hope to share a few thoughts with you today about water policy in particular, especially as it relates to our great state. I would like to spend just a few minutes talking to you about water policy and then agriculture and then some of the global changes that are going on that affect our state and our industry. Water is, in my opinion, the biggest long-term issue facing Florida. It is our biggest long-term challenge, whether you're from Apalachicola or from Miami. Whether you want to build plant an orange grove, build a subdivision, or save the Everglades, getting water supply correct and getting water quality procedures and technologies and policy in place is going to be important for the future of our state. In a state where so many of our residents are from somewhere else, the closest thing that we have to a common identity is our affinity for the water, whether it's springs or lakes or rivers or the Everglades or the Gulf or the Atlantic. It brings us together and it gives us the quality of life that makes people want to come here. And it certainly is the lifeblood for supporting our population and supporting a $100 billion agriculture industry. And so we have an opportunity this year, and I am very hopeful that this will be something that manages to get across the finish line by Friday so that it is part of the state's policy to have a water policy for Florida that is statewide in nature. And candidly, I believe that much of our water policy over the last 2.5 decades has been really geared solely toward Everglades and Lake Okeechobee to the exclusion of springs and surface water and Appalach and other issues that are factors north of Orlando. It needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be flexible enough to recognize that some years Florida has record droughts and we have record wildfires, and some years we get 90 inches of rain in 45 days. And the reason why it's important to get it done this year is because we are not responding to one of those types of crises. We used to say in Congress that Congress only does two things well: nothing and overreact. And so, in my view, and the reason why we really brought this issue to the legislature and are working hard to shepherd the differences between the House and the Senate and bring it across the finish line, is because you make better policy when you're not reacting to some major catastrophic event. We're not responding to 4 hurricanes in 1 year like we had in 2004. We're not responding to a record wildfire season and drought like we had in 1998 that shut down I-95, I-4, and I-10, closed Disney World, and suspended the Firecracker 400 all in the same period of time. So you make better policy when you have an opportunity to do it in a dispassionate way. And the policy that's out there, I think, is a major step forward. It is statewide in that there is an appropriate emphasis on springs and spring sheds. There's an appropriate emphasis on our surface water, something vitally important, particularly to the Swanee Valley and to Jacksonville, the lower St. John's and the upper St. John's that starts down around the Orlando area. As a state, we will be on average 600 million gallons of water per day short by 2030 if we don't make the types of investments in policy and in infrastructure to capture and store water better than we do. As a state, we have to get out of the habit of using water only once. So conservation will be a factor. Reclaimed water will be a factor. New technologies will be a factor in that. On average, we get a fairly good amount of rainfall on average statewide. But we are not very good at collecting it, capturing it, storing it, and using it when we need it and where we need it at a later date. In the past, the water wars were defined largely by Pasco County suing Pinellas County, and the Tampa Bay water wars, and then the South Florida water wars. And North Florida basically took the approach that we're in pretty good shape when it comes to water, so we don't want anything to happen, because if anything happens, it probably means somebody's going to steal our water. Well, that's not necessarily the case anymore. In fact, in terms of what we're discussing now and what's being debated and wrangled over now, that's not the case at all. And North Florida now doesn't have the moral high ground of having no water issues. Apalachicola Bay is in an ecological free fall, which is causing economic devastation for Franklin County, and it's not because they overbuilt. It's not because there are too many condos in Appalachia or on Dog Island. It's a host of factors, including the fact that Atlanta's drinking too much of our water. But that's one of a number of factors. But the point is that when you look at the development south of I-10 along Florida's Panhandle coast, when you look at the continued number of tourists, the record number of tourists that come here, when you look at the challenges that our springs are facing, it's not just a South Florida problem anymore. It's not just Tampa's problem anymore. It's not just Orlando's problem anymore. It's Florida's problem. And we have to view this as a natural resource issue and as an infrastructure issue. It's both. For example, the best thing that you can do for water quality in the Florida Keys is get people off of the 55-gallon drums that their grandparents dug in the buried in the backyard and called it a septic tank or a French drain. So investing in improved septic systems, modern septic systems, investing in wastewater treatment, connecting old septic neighborhoods to advanced wastewater treatment, that's an infrastructure issue that has a direct correlation to improving the quality and health of our springs and our rivers and our lakes. The two have to go hand in hand. There are times when land acquisition and protecting areas around a spring shed makes sense. But there are also times when investing in old-fashioned infrastructure is also the best thing for the environment. To support 20 million people and 100 million visitors, those are the kinds of things that are going to have to move along a tandem path. And if we get that right, then we will continue to have the type of sustainable growth that Florida has come to expect and our economy depends on, and attract people from around the world who want this to be the gateway to their American dream, and have agriculture. And agriculture in Florida is an important pillar of our economy. Whether it's timber, fruits and vegetables, the cattle industry, all of those factors are vitally important to having a balanced economy that can withstand global financial collapses, national real estate downturns. And globally, and this is where the economics hat in all of us needs to come out, globally, we have to feed 7 billion people today. And by 2050, we have to be able to feed somewhere around 10 billion people. When I started giving that speech 4 years ago, it was 9. It's already gone up 1 billion in 5 years. And the technology and the innovation to feed 10 billion people will be an American innovation. It will be U.S. agricultural technology, of which Florida is an important part, that will make that possible. The breadbasket in the Midwestern U.S. and the soils in Florida and throughout the Southeast will allow us to meet that global demand. But we have to make the types of investments in water policy that allow that to happen so that it's a vibrant part of our economy, an important part of our national security, and part of global stability. That is why a global ag reserve corporation, which could invest anywhere in the world and does have investments in all over the world, bought 360,000 acres of land in North Florida for its agricultural value. Not because they're waiting to build a new city there, not because they're waiting on development to catch it, but because of its agricultural value. That's why Bill Gates is investing in land in Florida. That's why there are international groups that are looking at the 560,000 acre piece of land in Perry to buy land for its forest and agricultural value in our state. And so, no matter how sophisticated or technologically savvy we are as a state, no matter how big our tourism numbers are, agriculture, land use, economic gains rooted in the land will be a vitally and vibrant part of Florida's economic future. And we can't take our eye off the ball for that. And so having water policy right for the people, for the environment, for industry is critically important to making all of that possible and keeping Florida, the Florida that we all grew up in and know and love, so that our children and grandchildren have the opportunity to enjoy the springs and the lakes and the fishing in the Gulf or in the Atlantic. All of that has to move forward together as economic development and as environmental policy. They're inseparable from one another. And so meeting that demand for global food production is something that Florida is well positioned to be a major player in. Sourced and supplied by innovation coming out of Florida's universities, Florida's innovation, Florida's higher education system that allows those things to be possible. Now the challenges to that are things that have plagued agriculture and resources forever. Pests, disease, pestilence, new bugs that hitchhike in here. And so from an economic standpoint, as we look at the transformational issues that are coming about as a result of the doubling of the Panama Canal, which means that Florida ports will be the first ports on the east coast of the U.S. to benefit from that change in trade and the change in shipping channels. What will they bring that will be a threat to Florida? And how does Florida prepare for that increase in international travel and international cargo volume that could be a threat to our environment or a threat to agriculture? The Florida citrus industry is very much at risk of going away because of a disease that hitchhiked into one of our ports. The Everglades are full of pythons because of the international influence of that pet that came into our state that thrives here. The pressure that is on to change the rules that would allow perishable commodities to come directly into Florida ports, which historically have been forbidden because we don't have a hard freeze that would kill bugs that hitchhike in on container ships and pallets and other ways that they sneak in here. For years, that has been our protection. And so as we navigate this new world, and we look at new trans-Pacific trade agreements that are moving closer and closer to fulfillment, and we move into the momentum of potentially a trade agreement with the EU that allows us the opportunity to open up new markets for what Florida grows and what Florida makes, we have to go into that with the approach that the technology to protect our environment, to protect our industry, to protect our people from pests and diseases that will come in here have to be a part of that negotiation. As the federal government revisits the relationship that the United States has with Cuba, who will be the greatest impact, who will feel the greatest impact of that changed relationship with Cuba first, and who will feel it the most? Florida will. And so there are things beyond just the allure of going into, of having the forbidden fruit reopened to, this great off-limits island in the middle of the Caribbean that has all these great stories associated with it from the 50s and the early 60s. if you look at blowing the doors wide open, we have to be prepared for the consequences that come with that, which include impacting our ecosystem and our agriculture industry. And so the economics of that have to recognize the trade-offs that are involved in any of these trade agreements or any of these shifts in relationships as we move forward. It doesn't mean we don't do them, but it means that you have to go into it eyes wide open, knowing the history of the impact that some of these have had on Florida, not just on our farmers and ranchers, but also on the environment. Getting that water policy right, and I am so hopeful that we can bring it in for a landing in this legislative session, will be a major step forward for protecting the quality of life that we all know and love here in Florida, and allowing these key sectors of our economy to be vibrant and profitable and sustainable for generations to come. Thank you very much for the opportunity to let me share just a few thoughts about that with you. And I'm happy to open up the floor for questions if that's allowed, Mr. President.
Club members only?
But what's going on in California and the devastation to their ag industry, which is the #1 ag industry in America. We're #2, they're #1. It is precisely the exhibit A of why we need to get water policy right before it's a crisis. Because if you wait until it's a crisis, you've waited too long. In a perfect world, we would have a water supply plan that, rather than pitting one permitted user against another, we would grow the size of that water pie. I remember speaking to a group in Kissimmee one time, and they raised a similar concern about the bottling companies. And I said, well, you know, right around the corner is a Gatorade plant. And, you know, you could make the same argument for the Gatorade plant that you're making for the bottling plant. And they said, they just got this quizzical look and said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about water. You're talking about Gatorade. And I said, it's the same water with a little squirt of green or pink or blue. And so, you know, whether it's a brewery or a beverage plant or a well field for a peanut farm or a well field for a city, it's not good economic development for us to be in such a situation that we're pitting one permitted user against another. What we really need to do is have the volume grow, the supply grow, through any number of the things that we've talked about and more, so that that's less and less of a fight. So you don't have Pinellas suing Pasco, but you have a regional approach to managing that water. And our water management districts play a vital role in that.
Great.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
So we stand adjourned. We look forward to seeing our next program. Thank you.